Hello, and welcome to another episode of Something Rhymes with Purple. This is a podcast presented by me, Gyles Brandreth, and my friend
Susie Dent. We're a bit slow there.
Susie Dent. Well, she's a beat behind me, but that's because she's down the line. She's in Oxford, close to the Oxford English Dictionary, where she used to work, and which is now her constant study. She, of course, is famous for being the person in Dictionary Corner on the word game Countdown, Words and Numbers game Countdown on Channel 4. I'm Gyles Brandreth, and I'm here because I'm her admirer. I'm one of her groupies. Actually, what's the origin of the word groupie? That's what we do on this show. We meet every week and we talk about words and language. We explore the power of language and where language comes from, where it's going to. Groupies. I say I'm one of your groupies. What's the origin of that expression?
Well,
what does it mean?
It means that you want to belong to that group, to the in crowd. And it first started with military slang, as so often. So it started in the RAF. And a groupie then was a kind of group captain. So that kind of makes sense. But then quite soon after, about a decade after, it meant a person associated with a core group of famous people. So they're kind of on the periphery and want to be on the inside. And then in the 60s, of course, that's when the groupie really took over. And
because they pursued pop groups.
Yeah, rock and roll
if you
groups.
were a Beatles fan.
Yes.
You were Beatlemania.
Exactly.
The people who ran after them, and the people particularly ran after the Rolling Stones, they were their groupies.
Exactly. So it started in America, I think, with rock and roll. And then, as you say, it kind of, the Beatles had to have groupies. And they've stayed ever since.
So we're constantly using words that we don't know, whether we know, but we don't know where they come from, like groupie. I was using one this morning, a phrase. I was on my daily walk. I do 6,000 steps a day, more about my tricycle later. But I was doing my 6,000 steps when I stumbled over a paving stone. And I almost went for a Burton. Then I thought, what's the origin of going for a Burton? And I thought Susie will know. What is the answer?
Going for a Burton, well, the best theory for that is that it goes back to Burton's Ale that was produced in Burton-upon-Trent. And there was an ad, a poster at the time that said, "Gone for a Burton." So if somebody was missing from a particular place, he would just leave a note, or she would leave a note saying, "Gone for a Burton." And then it became, again, military slang, probably the RAF, when it's a bit sad and black humour, really, but when a plane went down in the water, it went down in the drink. And so people said the pilot had gone for a Burton. So it's quite a sad beginnings, that one.
What I love, and listeners should know this, is we don't prepare this. It may be clear that we don't prepare this, but the point is, when I tuned in to Susie a few minutes ago, she had no idea that I was going to ask her about Gone for Burton or groupies. She just has all this inside her colossal brain.
I have a lot of rubbish stuff in there as well, and sometimes it doesn't come to the fore. So sometimes I have Lethologica, which is when I can't think of the right word for the right moment. In fact, that happens to me.
What's that word?
Lethologica. Lethologica. Ologica. It's the inability to find the right word at the right time.
Now, what's the letho part? Because I thought Lethe usually gave us sleep.
Yes,
what does letho
quite right.
Give
so
us?
The river Lethe in Greek mythology was the one that made you sink into oblivion and to forget. And that oblivion could be sleep, or it could be the erasing of all memories of the past. And that's why when you are lethargic, it looks back to that river Lethe, because you have nothing left almost. You are kind of devoid of everything, including energy.
You see, this is the joy, in a way, I hope, of this podcast, because we want it to be fun, but also it's incidentally educational. I learn things. So Lethologica.
Yes.
Lethologica means forgetting the word that you thought you had. You just can't bring it to mind.
Exactly. And do you remember tartle? Do you remember tartling? Going
I do
off on a
remember
tangent.
the word. We doesn't matter. Tartling is good. It's nice. It's like rambling. We are rambling free. We're going down the odd cul-de-sac. Remind me about tartling.
Yes. So tartle, I think it's one of my trio once. Tartle is a great Scots word, and it means hesitating before introducing someone because you've forgotten their name.
Oh, that happened to me once with my wife. What had happened was there was a group of 10 people, and I'd done brilliantly. I introduced the first 9, getting their names absolutely spot on. I thought, I'm genius. And then I got to this last one, and I said, and here is this beautiful creature, this amazing woman, this fantastic. And somebody said, stop being so patronizing. I said, oh, well, she's my wife. I could not remember her name.
Bizarre.
Quite terrifying.
Yeah.
But just for a moment. Now, one of the problems with remembering words is there's so many more to remember than there used to be because the language is growing all the time. What is the size of the English language today as opposed to, say, 500 years ago in Shakespeare's time?
Gosh, I was really hoping you weren't going to ask me that question. Well, it's a really boring answer when everyone says, how many words are there in the English language? The sort of smart ass answer to that would be 3, the English language. But moving on from that, it's almost impossible to give you an answer, Gyles, because what is a word? I mean, would you say that run, runs, running, runner are all different words or part of the same word? And then it becomes impossible. But there are, compared with Shakespeare's time, of course, there are sizably more words because the language grows. And we talked about this when we talked about Shakespeare, didn't we? And how many words he had at his disposal compared with ours. And I think it was probably about half of what our daily not daily vocabulary, but our entire repository of vocabulary is today. You know, what he did with it was quite amazing.
This is extraordinary. We have twice the vocabulary that Shakespeare had, but we can't even write half as well.
No, it's true.
Now, what I want to find out from you today is how words get into the dictionary. For example, this week I've come across a couple of phrases that I think will end up in the dictionary. Well, one will end up in the dictionary. Taking the knee.
Yes.
Familiar words, but the expression taking the knee will appear in the dictionary, I imagine, because 100 years from now, people will need to know what that meant, how it came about. But there's another expression I came across this week that made me smile, which was getting on your wicks.
Oh, yes.
Which is an amusing play on words. And it's what unnerves you or irritates you when there are people next door who are playing Joe Wicks too loud with their children in the morning. He's getting on my wicks. Now, that, I think, won't get into the dictionary because it's amusing. Who decides at the OED? I imagine once a year they decide we've got a new edition coming up next year. What are we going to put in the dictionary? Or maybe now it's rolling because of it being all on the internet. Who decides whether and when taking the knee goes into the OED?
I'm just checking actually, Gyles, because it might already be in. I remember doing a programme with Channel 4 back, it was 2017, where they were looking at all the new words that were bubbling under and actually then starting to simmer. And I'm extending a really bad metaphor, but we talked about taking the knee then, and I'm just looking to see, I'm sure it will be in current dictionaries. I'm just looking to see if it will be in the OED, because as we know, that takes a little longer, because once a word goes in, it never, ever comes out. I can't find it at the moment, but I might have a look for that later, because I wouldn't be surprised.
That's interesting. That's rather like two things. Once the word goes in, it doesn't come out. It's a little bit like who's who. Once you get into who's who, they don't drop you.
Really?
Yeah, they
what about
keep
if you're
you
disgraced?
there.
I mean, is there an unpersoning involved ever?
No, there isn't unpersoning involved, because it's a work of reference. It's not judgmental. They're not censoring. If you're in, you're in. Similarly, do you remember the late, great David Frost? Did you know?
I didn't know him,
Sir
but
David
I know
Frost?
you've talked about him before, and I know exactly who you mean. Yeah.
He was a pioneering broadcaster, started out in the 1960s. And he was also a very nice, generous human being. And he gave parties, legendary parties. And one of the great things about his party is once he invited you, he always invited you. He never dropped anybody from the list.
Huge. Did you have to keep?
Well, fortunately
venues?
for him, people did die off. The venue was vast at the end, a huge public garden. But people did drop off the perch. So that's a good rule. So once you invite people, don't drop them. Once the word is included. So how does a new word get into the dictionary?
The thing about lexicography is that its terminology is incredibly off-putting and really quite cold, which I think is a shame, because lexicography is anything but, boring and sterile. And so I'm about to use a really horrible word, which is corpora. And a corpora is the plural of corpus. And each dictionary publisher has access to usually its own corpus. And inside, corpus meaning body, inside this body of data is the most amazing, fascinating material. So into it will be fed, from evidence of modern writing. So it could be text conversations, including emojis. It could be, chat room conversations. It might be a transcript of a conversation overheard on the street, right down to scholarly journals, historical novels, literature, etc. So as much written evidence as dictionary publishers can find are fed into these corpora. And this is what dictionary makers use to write their dictionaries. So say, let's think of the reason I wanted to talk about new words today, we should say, is that I remember hearing you on an interview, I think, saying that you love the new word YOLO. And I thought, Gyles, that's been around for too long. We need to talk about new words.
It's new to me. When you're my age, anything is new that's happened in the last 10 years.
Oh, well, take YOLO. Obviously, you only live once, and it's a great philosophy in life. And I'm sure it's yours because of the energy with which you tackle life. But, say that was a new word that was bubbling under. A dictionary maker would look to see how often it's being used, first of all, how many different contexts it's being used in. So it wouldn't be any good if it was just being used on one website, because then it would probably be the invention of that website owner. Then, which other words it's being used with. So is it being used as a verb? So could you say, I really YOLO'd last week? Or is it just an acronym and it will remain a noun, acronym, et cetera, et cetera. So we will study all the evidence of how a word is used. And if it looks like it has longevity and it is being used by enough people in enough different contexts, then it has a very good chance of going in. But the one thing I would say is that I'm always asked, is it a word? People say, is such and such a word? And the answer to that is always, yes, anything is a word. I think what they want is an authority, because we don't have an academy or authority governing English and how it develops. So what they really mean is it in the dictionary? In other words, is it legitimate? But as you know, and as we've talked before, dictionaries reflect how we speak. They are a democracy. They don't tell us what is right and what is wrong.
Is YOLO in the dictionary?
Definitely. YOLO is in the dictionary, as is FOMO and all of those.
In the olden days, when I first became familiar with the Oxford English Dictionary, it was then the editor, and I know I've mentioned him to you before, was a lovely man called Dr. Robert Birchfield.
Yes.
Who was a New Zealander.
Yes.
We're going back to the 1960s, 1970s.
Yeah.
And I remember he told me that he had a team of readers.
Yes.
Around not just the British Isles, but the British Commonwealth and America. And they were distinguished people. I remember one of them, I met her, was the novelist Margarita Lasky. She wrote a wonderful novel called Little Boy Lost. People are looking for a lockdown read. I recommend this. It's a post-war novel set in Europe by Margarita Lasky. Anyway, older listeners will recall this lady. She was on things like the Brains Trust in the 1950s, 1960s. Okay. A highly intellectual woman who I'm sure read the Times Educational Supplement, the Times Literary Supplement, and the Guardian. And she would cut out, when she saw a word that was unusual, she would cut it out and put it on a postcard and send it to him. And he showed me these boxes he had of postcards from around the world. Yeah. And that's how they, in those days, we're going back 50 years, evaluated the currency of new words.
That's right.
So it's a modern way of doing that thing.
Yeah, they were called slips. You can still find the slips from the very first Oxford English Dictionary. They're in the Oxford University Press Museum. And, they took up so much room, you can only imagine. And of course, when a new record of a word was found, the editor had to go back to that particular slip and then write in a new thing. So it is incredible how much digitization has really helped lexicography. But, and in so doing, also the definitions have become more and more objective, because Samuel Johnson would, either be very rude about the Scots, as we know, or he would define strumpet as a sort of a harridan and a woman you do not want to consort with, etc. And in modern lexicography, you don't have any of that. It's all really objective. And that's partly because we have all this evidence now, which is,
And also, great. Is there less intellectual snobbery? Why do I think, and I may have got this wrong, that Virginia Woolf's father was involved in the early days of the Oxford English Dictionary? Am I imagining this?
I don't know. That's one I didn't know. Tolkien worked on the Oxford English Dictionary.
This is before that, because the OED began in the 1890s, didn't it?
Tolkien, Julian Barnes, Salman Rushdie. I mean, a lot of really, celebrated figures have worked or have begun their sort of careers on the Oxford English Dictionary.
What I'm asking, is it now more inclusive, more generous? I've just got a feeling that 100 years ago, perhaps there was certain words wouldn't have been thought of.
I guess that's true. Not so much slang. Johnson didn't include slang, and nor did the early lexicographers, unless it was a dictionary of slang. And we have to remember that the very first dictionaries were dictionaries of criminal slang. But no, you're right. You wouldn't have found a swear word, for example. And now you can freely look up whichever word you want, because let's face it, a lot of people want to look up exactly those words. And if it's slang also, the whole idea of slang is that you can't really understand it, because it's meant to be the tribal thing that other people can't comprehend.
Now, do you think that the coronavirus crisis will have introduced a lot of new words to the vocabulary? And which ones do you think will make the grade to the dictionary?
Well, some have already gone in. So this is how quickly dictionary makers move now. When I started out at Oxford University Press, the standard amount of time that you would wait was about 5 years. That's not the case now. And I remember it beginning to change with chav. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And chav just exploded onto the scene in 2004, and it had to be explained, and it had to be what we would call glossed in a dictionary, which means defined. So now we move very, very quickly, and things like WFH, working from home, flattening the curve, hot zone, social distancing, etc., have all gone into the Oxford's current dictionaries very recently. There will be others that actually been around for a while. So quarantine we talked about, didn't we, coming from Phoenician dialect, and 40 days, because that was the original quarantine. Things like self-isolation. The whole idea of self-isolating because of a virus is about the 1940s. So some of them have just come back into currency. And that's how new words work. Not all new words are new. In fact, loads of them are just a recycling of a word that's either had a different meaning in the past, or it seems to fit our new reality, so we bring it back.
What would be your top 2 or 3 that you think might go in? Because I think the ones that I've enjoyed won't make it in the end. I mean, I've loved the expression furlough Merlot.
Yes.
The amount of drink that we're consuming during this troubled time.
Yes.
Are there any that will go in, do you think?
What of the more light-hearted ones? As I say, because quite a lot of the COVID vocabulary is already in there and has just gone in. I think covidiot might stand a chance. So somebody who behaves
I like that one.
stupidly. But things like clap hazard, you know, we talked about that. The clap hazard is the person who, when applauding the NHS, just stood a little bit too close to you. I don't think those will.
Of the new words that do come in and last, quite a few of them have been portmanteau words.
Yes.
Those words that are called portmanteaus because in Victorian times there was a portmanteau that was an overnight case, called portmanteau because in it you put your coat, porte-manteau, carry, coat, manteau. And we've discussed before, Lewis Carroll, how he pioneered them with words like galumph, combining gallop and triumph. But there have been more recent ones.
Any recent ones? Yes. The one that I quite like, do you remember we talked about anticipantment? Really looking forward to something so much and then being disappointed when it actually comes. Or it can be really looking forward to something, but actually knowing it's going to be a bit of a disappointment. And so you get that kind of pre-regret as another one of kind of regretting it before it even happens. I also like probsolutely. If someone asks you if you're going to do something, you can just say probsolutely, which is a definite maybe. But putting portmanteau together and blends, as they're called, is one of the most productive mechanisms for creating new words. So I would say they account for probably about at least 10, 15% of all new words. And only 1%, Gyles, only 1% of new words are creations by one person in one moment of time. As in entirely new. They haven't taken an existing word and put something together with another one. They've actually created something entirely new. And that is very, very rare.
What about Velcro? Do you know the origin of that?
I think I do. No, I know it's a trademark.
It's a portmanteau word. It's velvet and crochet, apparently.
Okay.
And of course, twerk.
Twisting and working. Something and working,
Twisting
isn't it?
and jerking.
A jerking.
And the queen of the twerk in the early days was Miley Cyrus.
Yes.
And as you know, I love to do a little bit of name dropping. No episode of this would be complete without it. Of course, to say I met her, I travelled in a lift with her. I've travelled in a lift with some interesting people. And this was at the BBC. She was going in to do Radio 1, Radio 2. I was going as well. We went up and I showed her my twerk. And
oh dear.
She didn't say very much. And in order to make conversation, I tried to... She didn't know. The point is, she did not know the origin of the word twerk. She knew that she was the queen of twerks, but she didn't know.
Are you telling me you
twist
actually cut through the silence of a lift and said, hello, you don't know who I am, but I'm going to tell you the origin of twerk? Did it work that way?
It did work a little bit that way. I did not need to say, you don't know who I am, because she greeted me as though she did know me. And it was at the height of the twerk craze. I did a little bit of twerking, and she said, oh, I don't think she said much more than that. I was going to pretend she said, oh, that's lovely, or isn't that cute? She didn't. She went, oh. And I said, do you know the origin of the word twerk? And she did say no.
And then the lift doors opened and that was that.
Yes. So I think the sum total of our conversation was hello, oh, no, goodbye.
That sums up lots of my encounters.
With Miley Cyrus.
Oh,
very good.
Brilliant.
What about we must take a break, but fromage? Do you know that one?
Fromage. Fake cheese? Vegan cheese?
Yes. Isn't that clever? It's vegan cheese is fromage.
If any purple people can recommend to me a really lovely vegan cheese, please could they let me know, because I'm still on the hunt.
This is what Something Rhymes with Purple is all about. It's the lifestyle of Susie Dent. And if you can help her, you just get in touch. It's purple@somethingelse.com, something without a G, because we like to be a little bit different. Purple@somethingelse.com is how you can get in touch with us. And I'll give you, after the break, the origin of this word. Snart. Snart. Please don't.
There's one question I always get, whether it's in the Countdown audience or emails or tweets. It is, can I get this word in the dictionary? Gyles, is there one that you're burning to have within the pages of the Oxford Dictionary?
Snart.
Oh, yeah, tell us about snart.
S-N-A-R-T. This is the word I want to have in the dictionary. It's a combination of sneeze and fart. It's when you, as it were, break wind at both ends at the same time. It's to commit a snart.
That's a through cough, remember? A through or thorough
I do
cough,
remember that. I know, it's your thorough cough. That's an old and cumbersome word, thorough cough.
Yeah.
Snart is short and snappy.
Other people will know a ruder variant on that, which involves different activities of the body, but let's leave that there.
I want to get snart into the dictionary. I imagine it isn't. The hunting of the snart. The snart might be, because it's in that famous poem by Lewis Carroll.
But also you can be snarky, can't you?
Does that go back to the hunting of the snark?
Sorry about that.
Being snarky.
Looking of my mouse mat. I think, I'm not sure actually. I think there might be different. Snarky to me sounds onomatopoeic, but I might be wrong. So I'm just looking now. It is onomatopoeic and it goes back to the 19th century. It's a sibling of German schnarchen and eventually schnarchen, which means to snore. So it's a kind of snoring, snorting sound. And so by being snarky, you're being a bit snorty.
Very good. Yeah. So what chance have I got with snart, and how do I get it into the dictionary if I'm really determined?
Well, it's hard, this one, because you cannot petition for a word to go in the dictionary and then, get 1,000 signatures or 1,000,000 signatures and then get it to go in. What needs to happen is for people to use it. So usage is queen. You need to get lots of people using it in lots of different places, written and spoken, and to hopefully imbue it with enough meaning that it will become instantly recognizable to people. And the ruder equivalent of this, which I will now mention, is shart. And you can imagine what that means. That probably isn't in the dictionary, in the official dictionary, but you'll find it in the unofficial dictionaries. So I think, I'm not sure how much luck you'll have with that one, but people have in the past campaigned very vociferously to get a word in the dictionary. So do you remember I mentioned the British Potato Council who wanted to get rid of couch potato? And so they stood with placards outside the offices of the Oxford English Dictionary. Couch slouch. They wanted to replace couch potato because they thought it was denigrating to the poor potato, which is a nutritious vegetable. So that was one that didn't work. But there was another campaign, which was by Soccer AM, I think, for the word bounce back ability to go in. So that was a kind of resilience, really, of someone, whether it's a ball or a player or whatever. And they campaigned for bounce back ability to get in the dictionary. And the campaign itself didn't work. But interestingly, it got picked up by enough people, the word, that it did eventually go in. So all is not lost.
When I was a little boy, I had a toy called Nozo. Now, Nozo was taller than me when I was very small. He was 3 foot, 3'6". It was a plastic doll, like one of those Russian dolls where you keep opening them. So it was a round Russian-like doll. It was a clown's face. And it had a soft nose, and you punched the nose and it fell over. And then it always bounced back and it hit you. So you pushed it over, it came back and bopped you. It had bounceability.
That sounds fun.
So what are words?
Actually,
so
fascinatingly, just to finish off on bounce back ability, I thought it was because of the kind of increase in usage due to that campaign by Soccer AM. But looking at it now in the OED, as these editors so often do, they've dug and they've dug and they've dug and they've found earlier records than you might think. So there is a record of it going back to the 1960s. So there you go. It flew below the radar, a bit like chav that I mentioned earlier, that is at least 200 years old and actually was quite a nice term once upon a time. And then it suddenly comes back up onto the radar, and it might have a new meaning, or it might just suddenly become popular again. And that's very much how language works.
Are there words and phrases from your family? Nozo is one from my childhood. If you bounced back, you were doing a nozo. Are there words and phrases from your childhood or your family that you remember that were particular to the Dent household?
Yes, I used one actually. I was talking to Scott Mills and Chris Stark from their Radio 5 Live program this week, and I was talking about the podcast, and they did this kind of, is this true or false about your life? And they've just said, we found the following facts about you. Are they true or not? And I was really worried about this, but actually most of them were true. And one of them was, did your dad break your leg while he was tickling you? And the answer was, yes, Dad, you did, because I hate being tickled with a passion. I just hate it. And, you know, there are two types of tickling, gargalesis and kinesmesis. And gargalesis is the heavy kind, the one that really induces laughter. And I hate gargalesis. Anyway, he did break my leg, and it was during something we called roughhousing. And so I said to Chris and Scott, did you call it roughhousing? And they said, no. So that's what we called kind of mucking about in a sort of physical way. So it's like physical play fighting. But then there are the ones which I think are just born of the sweet things that kids say. So, for example, we always call Huddersfield FC, which is an English football team, Hugglesfield, because that's what my youngest still calls it. Things like that we have kept as a nod to their childhood. How about you?
I don't think we do have any.
Oh.
I mean, curiously, I felt there should be some eggcorns. Remind us what eggcorns are.
Okay, so eggcorn itself is a mishearing of acorn, and it's the sort of things, it's the slips of the ear. So it's something that you grow up thinking is one word, but actually you're completely mishearing another.
For years, I thought God, you know, up in the sky, I thought he had a name. And I was asked once, what do you call God? And I said, well, my dad calls him Harold. They said, Harold. And the teacher said, Harold? Yes. I said, yes, because I've heard my dad.
I know what's coming. The Lord's Prayer.
Our Father.
Who art in heaven.
Which art in heaven. Harold. Harold be thy name. So I thought it was, because I sort of heard this mumbling going on. So, actually, if anybody has got an eggcorn like that, or what's a mondegreen, by the way?
Yes, this is what we'd love to hear, actually, from our listeners. Mondegreens are mishearings of song lyrics. And
yes.
Oh, God, we've all got some of those. So me going to a convent, it's quite similar to your Lord's Prayer. I was convinced for years that I was singing Lord of the Dance settee. But mondegreen itself, the word goes back. Well, maybe we'll leave that to because we're going to do a programme about mondegreens, aren't we?
We covered eggcorns, didn't we, in one of our very first episodes. So people can go back. Actually, it's all there, by the way. We've done 63, 64 episodes. You can go right back to the beginning. We covered eggcorns yonks ago, and we're going to be covering mondegreens in a couple of weeks. But if people have got made-up words that were family words or phrases, ones that their family use, their friends use, we'd love to hear about them. And we are global. That's the joy of Something Rhymes with Purple. We have a global audience. How do they communicate with us? Remind me.
Well, the best thing to do to get in touch is to email purple@somethingelse.com. And as you said at the beginning, something does not have a G at the end of it. So it's somethingelse.com.
Last week, and let me deal with some of the correspondence to do with woodlice.
Oh, my goodness.
Because last week we had an email from Diana in Somerset who wanted to know why people call woodlice Billy Bakers. We didn't know, but we put a call out to you, the purple people, to see what you call them and whether anyone knows where Billy Bakers comes from. Sadly, no one yet can answer the Billy Baker question, but we've had some fascinating alternative names sent in. Karen in Aberdeen calls them Slaters, and this is backed up by Jim Wiggins in Dumbarton. Is that a Scottish thing? I mean, not that Aberdeen and Dumbarton are that close.
That's really interesting. Slaters. Okay.
I've got another one here. Eddie Muggleton. I'll give you all of these. Eddie Muggleton from Guildford called them cheesy bugs when growing up. And she adds that she and her brother used to make Lego cities for the cheesy bugs to run around in. It's an amusing idea, isn't it? I think
That's
there's a movie
cute.
in that. Cockney Eric says growing up in Romney Marsh, they were known as monkey beetles. There are a few more. Chicky pig is the phrase Selina Hazlitt from Devon is familiar with, whereas Alex Cook from the Mendip area of Somerset swears that woodlice are called daddy gramphers.
Yeah.
And finally, Rebecca Locke from North Hampshire didn't realise until she was 10 years old that the word woodlouse existed.
Oh.
They were always known as curly bobs
Oh, I love
in
that.
her household.
I love that. Yeah, well, it's really interesting. As I say, I've done a bit of looking. First of all, I didn't know this, but there are 40 different varieties of woodlice. Did you know this? Or woodlouse?
No.
Okay.
No.
But actually, there's an even greater variety of names for them. So pigs come in a lot. There's slunker pigs, wood pigs, penny sows, and sow pigs. Why? I don't know. Maybe because they're thought of being quite cute. Who knows? In Cornwall, though, we get this idea of a kind of almost half pig and half grandparent, because you get a grandma sow, and then that grandparent kicks in, as one of our correspondents has said, and there's grandad gravies, granny greys, granny granchers, grandfee krugers as well, and all sorts of amazing variations. And you know, you can see how it works is that one child hears something and then they kind of, you know, maybe mishear it or they twist it a little bit, and so it goes on. And then in the southeast where I grew up, there's a real dairy theme. So in Kent they call them cheesy bugs, as we heard, cheese rockers, cheese logs, chisel bugs, and then in some places the monkey comes in. So there's monkey peas, monkey pigs. There's sour bugs as well, because apparently you can eat a woodlouse if you are so interested. But then Northern Ireland and Scotland, and in fact New Zealand and Australia as well, perhaps because they have Scottish and Irish communities, call them slaters, as we had in slaty beetles. So it's fascinating. And as so often with dialect, Gyles, because it's oral, we don't have so much written evidence that we can unpack and say it came from here. But for me, the kind of predominant, the thing that unifies all of them is that they're quite cute, all these names. And it's just, I love the fact that there are so many names, but I'd also love to know if in the US, and we have a lot of listeners in the US, whether in fact they also have a huge variation of words for them.
As a born-again vegetarian, I have to say I'm shocked at the idea of people eating woodlice. Yes. Though once I was in North Africa and was offered as a kind of sweetmeat with my coffee, chocolate-coated cockroaches, bees, wasps, and other insects. Apparently the crunch combined with the chocolate made them delicious. I didn't partake.
No.
I decided not to.
Stick with chocolate-coloured coffee beans. They're amazing.
If you want to get in touch with us, please do, from wherever you are in the world. We'd love to know more about this. We'd love also to have your familial words and phrases. We don't need to be told that Sir Leslie Stephen, the father of Virginia Woolf, was not involved in the Oxford English Dictionary. It was the Dictionary of National Biography.
Oh, interesting.
That he was a pioneer. Okay. So I remember that during our little break. Time for one more quick letter.
Yes.
And then I want to hear what your trio of words is.
Okay.
Dear Susie and Gyles, Christy Spencer Polk from Portland, Oregon here. Oh,
there you go.
Talking about our international following. Yeah. Hello, Portland, Oregon. I absolutely loved your most recent episode, euphuism.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do you remember? This was the word I introduced you to.
Love that.
Not often that I get one up on you. Anyway, euphuism. Thinking that Orwell came up with this idea of unperson so many decades before the internet and the concept of ghosting. Ah, yes. And the emergence of cancel culture.
Yeah.
Oh, this is suddenly very topical, isn't it? As a contemporary means of digital unpersoning, leaving my spine tingling. Would love to hear you speak about both aforementioned contemporary terms on Something Rhymes with Purple. So basically what Christy's after is a discussion of ghosting and cancel culture. Explain that to people who don't know what ghosting and cancel culture are. I mean, have they been adopted? Are they now new words?
Yeah, so the word cancel, this century at least, is it's been pretty much used of people, hasn't it, as well as events. So if you cancel someone, particularly on social media, you boycott them. You basically do unperson them. You kind of almost make them into a non-entity by withdrawing all attention from them or following of them because you disapprove of something that they've done recently or quite often in the past. It is fascinating because we've had the statue toppling, globally recently, haven't we? Which, almost gives a new layer to unpersoning, I suppose, because we're to unperson, just to remind you, in Orwell's day was to basically strip somebody of any level of existence. It's to remove them from the history books as a way of rewriting history. It was to pretend they never existed. It was to vaporize them in Orwell's terms. And then it came to mean to regard them as of no social or political importance. And it's interesting what's been happening with the statues, because obviously this time it's not the state, it's the people who are saying these are no longer worthy of history, or at least their history needs to be remembered in very, very different terms, which is fascinating.
Is ghosting part of the same phenomenon?
So ghosting is more a kind of romantic thing. So if you're ghosted romantically, it means that someone that you're involved with suddenly disappears. They don't contact you. They don't, they just literally disappear. You have no idea where they've gone. And it's a horrible phenomenon.
Are they becoming a ghost, or are you becoming a ghost? In the origin of the phrase.
They are becoming the ghost. So suddenly they just literally suddenly disappear. Ghosting itself as a verb goes back centuries. It didn't mean it in this way. It was literally to pretend to be a ghost. So this is quite a new thing. But I think in the 2000s already people were talking about I've been ghosted. But yeah, it's that removal of existence that runs through all of this. And it is so topical. And of course, what Orwell was protesting against was the fact that the state can decide, or any authority can decide, what is the truth. And, you know, the state can decide what is worthy of recognition and what isn't. And it's a fascinating subject, but also really painful at the moment.
I want to see a statue put up to you, Susie Dent, because you are just amazing. A statue, oil painting, the works. I now want you to give us your 3 words of the week. This is Susie Dent's trio. Let them trip off your tongue.
They will trip off the tongue if I don't forget them, which is quite possible I will. I'll have the Lethologica at the wrong moment. But one of the ones talking about pain that I have been thinking of recently is there's an entry in the Oxford English Dictionary that has for, F-O-R, in front of a lot of different adjectives, which basically means exhausted by. So if you are forswunk, you are exhausted by too much work. If you are forewallowed, you are exhausted from tossing and turning all night. And if you are foreplaint, P-L-A-I-N-T, you are exhausted from weeping. And I think a lot of us have been feeling real sorrow in recent weeks. So foreplaint is my first one.
I like that. The
next one is, these are all a bit negative, sorry about this, but there's interdespite. I remember reading this in the OED and it kind of made me smile, but it doesn't so much these days. Is to hate someone as much as they hate you. Interdespite.
I like that.
So mutual dislike. So I'm going to finish with a more positive one, because when everything gets a bit too much, we've talked about the growlery before, which is the place in your house where you can just go and growl and let it all off. Let it all go. And we've talked about frontistery, which is a place for contemplation. But this one is simply a lectory, which is a place to read and escape in a book, literature, whatever is your choice. Lectory.
Well, in my lectory this week, I've been dipping through Dancing by the Light of the Moon, my anthology of poems to learn by heart. And I came across this poem, which I included, that I'd forgotten. Okay. And I think I'm going to try and learn it this week. It's by Philip Larkin. It's called Days. What are days for? Days are where we live. They come, they wake us, time and time over. They are to be happy in. Where can we live but days? Solving that question brings the priest and the doctor in their long coats running over the fields.
Wow.
That's my poem, and that's been Something Rhymes with Purple. And it's been exciting to be here with you. If you want to be in touch with us, please do. purple@somethingelse.com. Do tell your friends about us. We're very honored. We've been in the running for Best Entertainment Podcast in the Podcast Awards, and we've been in the top 10 of podcasts in the UK. We want to do that globally. So that's our lot. Something Rhymes with Purple is a Something Else production, produced by Lawrence Bassett, with additional production from Steve Ackerman, Grace Laker, and Gully.
There you go.
Who's snarting away in the background.